Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. As I said to Jeff before this, really appreciate the focus on infrastructure as part of the Rediscovering Government initiative. A big thanks to Mark as well. Always great to see a former colleague and friendly face here. And I also want to say a special thank you to Nate Lowenthal from my team at the NEC. Nate is an absolute superstar, and we wouldn't be making a lot of the progress that we've been making in this space without him. This is a bit of a different backdrop here for an administration official speaking about infrastructure. Normally I would be at a port or on a bridge or something along those lines, talking about how 65% of major roads are rated in less than good condition, how 1 in 4 bridges in the United States require significant repair, or how congestion costs an estimated $120 billion per year in extra fuel and wasted time. Well, last week the president was at a major infrastructure project. He was in Panama, the Panama Canal, a project that has profound impact on our economy, on the region, on the world, a project that speaks not just to our concerns with disrepair, but to our ambitions for the future. Before diving a little bit more into infrastructure, let me take a step back and talk about the progress we've made with the economy overall. The private sector has now added more than 12 million jobs over the last 61 months. That's the longest streak of consistent job growth in U.S. history. We went from growth collapsing at a rate of more than 8% when the president took office to an economy that is driving global growth. In fact, the U.S. has added more jobs than Japan, Europe, and all other advanced economies combined. Now, while the president here at home still gets lambasted for an economy not growing as fast as we would like, when he travels abroad, like he did to meet with leaders from the region, the U.S. economy is seen as the envy of the world. Our manufacturing sector has added nearly 900,000 jobs, the first time of sustained manufacturing job growth since the 1990s. We're the world's #1 producer of oil and natural gas, and at the same time, since 2008, we have increased the production of energy from solar power by more than 20 times. Healthcare cost growth is at its lowest rate in 50 years, helping families, businesses, and federal budget projections. And now we're starting to see early signs of a welcome pickup in wages. Weekly earnings have risen nearly 5% over the last 12 months. So any way you cut it, this is progress. There's no way to deny that reality, but there's still a lot more that needs to get done. More than any other president, I would argue, in recent memory, President Obama's agenda has always included a bold and aggressive vision for increased investment in our nation's infrastructure. Earlier in the recovery, when unemployment was particularly elevated, we strongly made the case that infrastructure in particular could play a central role in putting people back to work. Unemployment for the country at that point reached 10%. Unemployment in the construction industry was 17%. And the administration's estimates are that for every $1 billion we spend on our transportation system, we create 13,000 jobs, 75% of which would be considered middle-class jobs. Now, the Recovery Act included a large infusion of federal funding into projects around the country, and I'm sure you have seen in your travels around the United States the Recovery Act sign on roads, bridges, in ports. That provided a really important boost, but a lot more needs to get done. Many, including a number of former administration officials, have loudly made the case that we can borrow cheaply and spend wisely to make cost-effective investments in our future. Last summer, as Congress careened towards the cliff for the Highway Trust Fund, something that we are doing in the months ahead, we made clear the cost of congressional inaction, showing how hundreds of thousands of workers would have been laid off from construction sites around the country almost immediately, how local and state governments were putting off planning of new projects because of the uncertainty here in Washington. And we attempted, but I would argue did not fully succeed, in making a case that is well understood by all of you in this room, that the U.S. is spending near historic lows in our transportation system, that our competitor countries in Europe are outspending us by 2 to 1. Countries like Hungary and Spain spend more as a percentage of GDP than the United States does on transportation infrastructure. That the quality of the US infrastructure, rated by the World Economic Forum, has fallen to 19th in just a decade. That the conditions of our roads and bridges are costing real money for families and businesses. Now, we have loudly and repeatedly made the case for the short-term benefits of infrastructure investment, for the cost of inaction, but I think where we have continued to struggle is articulating a vision for the longer-term benefits of infrastructure investment, for the role that federal investment in infrastructure plays in our vision of our future society. Now, research has shown that well-designed infrastructure can raise economic growth, it can raise productivity, land values, and also provide spillover benefits to economic development, energy efficiency, public health, and our manufacturing sector. And while much attention has been focused on the stagnation in middle-class earnings over the past 30 years, particularly the divergence between productivity gains and the income gains of middle-class families, one point that I think is not well understood: had we maintained our productivity growth rate of the previous period from 1948 to 1973, yet seen the increases in inequality that we have seen since 1973, there would be more than 50% higher median household incomes than we have today, more than twice the gains we would have seen by maintaining the distribution of incomes from 1948 to 1973. So the slowdown in productivity growth has had a profound impact on middle-class incomes, a larger impact than the increase in inequality that we've seen since 1973. And of course, federal investment in things like infrastructure and things like R&D have also slowed down in that period and play a real role in the slowdown in productivity growth. Now, I think for people like those of you in this room, I would challenge all of us to help craft this message, craft a vision for our future that gets beyond the near term, to make clear that the investments we make today are the scaffolding on which our future will be built. We're living on yesterday's infrastructure system, dealing with tomorrow's problems. And our debate seems to be mired in whether and what to cut from federal programs and how we're going to offset things in the federal budget and deal with our deficit challenges, rather than what the opportunities and challenges are that lie ahead and the role that federal investment plays in building the infrastructure we need to seize those opportunities and deal with those challenges. Now, the United States used to build enormous, great public works that were groundbreaking feats of mechanical engineering, works that reshaped cities and regions, like the Brooklyn Bridge of the late 19th century, the Hoover Dam of the 1930s, or of course the national highway system upon which we still rely today. Now, people differ on whether or not the era of great American public works is or should be over. Some believe that we should focus on maintaining our current system rather than continuing to expand it, or that the responsibility for our infrastructure rests with the states and not with our federal government. Now, economists will point out that diminishing marginal returns to expansion of infrastructure, say if you're going to build a third highway from Washington, D.C. to Baltimore, will have lower benefits than the second or the first that were built. But I think there's a very strong case to be made for investing now. Now, just to be clear, not to take anything away from maintenance, we're actually not spending enough on maintenance of our current system. The Department of Transportation estimates that we have a more than $500 billion backlog in existing highway and transit systems. The American Society of Civil Engineers estimates that we need an additional $20 billion per year just in maintenance. But where we should focus is on the case for why federal government should be investing in infrastructure for the long term, why we should dream big when it comes to our transportation, our water, our information, and our energy systems, because of the role that it plays in our lives, the way it improves our economy, and the way it shapes our society. Now, there are three drivers that will force the U.S. into action. First, the natural growth of our economy and our population will demand new activities and demand new infrastructure to support those activities. We've always played at the federal level a central role in fostering investments to accommodate growth from canals and railroads to highway and transit systems, and even to some extent to energy, water, and information systems. Second, the challenge of a changing climate will pose new threats, some of which we can't fully comprehend or imagine today, to our infrastructure system. And that will require significant investment to adapt and to ensure we have resilience built into our current system to deal with a changing planet. As just one example, the impact of changing weather and the increased incidence of severe storms will cause us to rethink how we construct new infrastructure and how we deal with our current system. Today, 13 of the largest airports in the United States are within the reach of moderate to high storm surges. Flooding caused by rising sea levels and storms could force tunnels, subway stations, low-lying roads, some of our rail lines, and our cargo facilities to have to be relocated or abandoned. To just take one example, Hurricane Katrina destroyed a number of rail lines around New Orleans, and a decade later, Amtrak service from New Orleans to Florida is still suspended. And of course, you've all seen with the recent actions being taken by Governor Brown in California that climate change is already in significant ways impacting water availability and water resources, a challenge that we're going to have to deal with in the near term while we also think about the systems in place to transition over time. Third, significant shifts in market patterns as a result of new technologies. As Jeff mentioned, I lead our manufacturing efforts, so let me talk about cars for a moment. The changes we will see in how people use and own cars and the technologies that power them, I believe will change more in the next 10 years than they have changed in the last 50. From car sharing to assisted driving safety features to vehicle electrification to autonomous and connected driving, these shifts will have profound impacts on our transportation needs, on our cities and regions, even things like how we think about parking structures, how we think about road safety, how we integrate our surface transportation system with our communications and energy infrastructure. And to address all of those will require significant and, I would argue, expanded investments. Our current path in many ways lacks imagination. Our current federal programs are not as large as they need to be, and they're not going to get us where we need to go without a change. And as we all know, infrastructure can be so much more than just a set of economic arguments about jobs, about safety, about productivity growth. Although important, as I've said, it's really about building for our future. The history of American public works inspired us. It demonstrated America's role in the world. But it also, amongst the American people, built support for public investment and reminded us of the role that government can play in our lives and the good that government can do. When we completed the Hoover Dam, they immediately built a monument to the accomplishment of that monumental task. A set of 30-foot tall statues called the Winged Figures of the Republic. The monument is surrounded by a floor with a celestial chart on it that shows the exact positions of key stars on the day that the dam was dedicated by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, September 30th, 1935. So that in the future, no matter what people stumbled upon this great feat, they would know, no matter their language, no matter whether they were from this planet or not, the precise date that the Hoover Dam was completed. Now, building our national infrastructure has also had positive consequences that we couldn't have predicted at the time. The national rail system, for example, was the birth of modern standardized time in the United States. Before the railroads, no one dreamed of uniting clocks around the country, let alone putting in place time zones. But the regularity of the trains created a sense of shared time across the United States. So they united us by more than just the physical distances that they connected. So let me transition from thinking in inspirational terms to the realities that we're facing in Washington, D.C. today. As you all know, Congress has struggled over the last few years to find a way to sustainably fund our transportation system. We've careened from short-term patch to short-term patch, unable to pay for investments that most everyone agrees we need. It's not just that we're not investing for the future. The uncertainty of this path is making it hard for investments to happen at all. In the last few months, we're aware of at least 5 states, Georgia, Delaware, Tennessee, Arkansas, and Wyoming, that have delayed or canceled projects worth roughly $2 billion, citing the uncertainty in the Highway Trust Fund as a source of regular funding to their projects. Now, the President's put forward the Grow America Act. That act was transmitted to Congress a couple of weeks ago, a proposal for how to address these shortfalls, how to repair our roads and bridges, modernize our infrastructure, our freight networks, our bus systems, our subway systems, our transit, light rail, passenger rail. It's a 6-year, $478 billion surface transportation reauthorization. It would grow federal investments by more than 40% over the next 6 years. And the President's put forward a specific way to pay for it with transition revenue from pro-growth business tax reform that closes loopholes, encourages investment here at home, and puts a 14% effective toll charge on all earnings overseas. Now, I know that in this town, conventional wisdom says that business tax reform is not going to get done in 2015, and it most definitely will not get done in 2016. But we believe it's a viable option. We believe it's the most viable option, and we're eager to work with both parties to move it forward. But I will say what the President has said before. We've put forward an idea that we believe is viable, an idea that both Democrats and Republicans investment in ports, roads, bridges, broadband, drinking water and sewer systems, and other projects to create jobs and get more investment flowing, including by fully utilizing federal lending programs like TIFIA, which I think provide a lot of opportunity and model for success. Transportation investment is not a new responsibility for Congress. It's been a central obligation of the federal government since our founding. So let me add a quote from Albert Gallatin, the second Secretary of the Treasury, and if you walk down Pennsylvania Avenue, his statue is sitting right outside of the Treasury Department with a phenomenal moniker on it, Albert Gallatin, a genius of finance, one of the better monikers on any statue in this city. The inconveniences, complaints, and perhaps dangers which may result from a vast extent of territory can no otherwise be radically removed or prevented than by opening speedy and easy communications. Good roads and canals will shorten distances, facilitate commercial and personal intercourse, and unite by a still more intimate community of interests the most remote quarters of the United States. No other single operation within the power of government can more effectually tend to strengthen and perpetuate that union which secures external independence, domestic peace, and internal liberty. This is a challenge we've been facing since our founding, since before our founding. It's something that the federal government needs to get done. It's something that we can get done. It's something we believe can get done this year. It's obviously more than the surface transportation bill that's currently in front of Congress, but we see no reason to allow the cynicism of the now to overwhelm our hopes for the future. So I look forward to working with all of you on this and additional endeavors in the weeks, months, and years ahead. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Jeff and Mark, for hosting this event. Look forward to hearing the outcome of today's conversations. Thank you.